And we are live. Thank you everyone for joining. Today we have a very interesting discussion. Before we dive into today's talk, a quick update about our plugins. Last week we released update 5.2.2 of our WP Activity Log plugin, in which we included now support for paid membership pro as well in terms of logging. So the plugin can keep a log of what changes users are doing when using that membership plugin. And I've also been on one of their live shows yesterday, which was streamed live on YouTube. I'll share some links later on my socials as well, if you'd like to watch. Uh, today we have an interesting guest. We have Oliver Sild, the CEO of Patchstack. Hello, Oliver. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing really well.
Good to hear. So yeah, I know Oliver. I've known you for a few years from earlier
Yeah.
WordCamps. Actually, you used to have a different security solution. It used to be called WebArcs, I think, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it was called WebArcs. It's actually still the same company, but we did quite a hard pivot at one point, deciding to we were in a path of like moving into almost like this all-in-one solution, which is very common in the WordPress ecosystem. And then we made a decision to, we know everything about vulnerabilities. We are really good at that. Let's just, stick to this and continue building on top of that. So that's when we also changed the company to Patchstack and really started focusing on security vulnerabilities in plugins, themes, and really just trying to solve this one particular problem.
Nice. In fact, yeah, before we jump into the whole Cyber Resilience Act and all these discussions, first of all, can you maybe tell our listeners a bit about your history, who you are?
Yeah, sure. I'm Oliver. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Patchstack. The company was actually founded by me and Dave, who is from the Netherlands. So back in the day, I was doing a lot of malware research. I was doing domain space kind of like auditing. I was looking up for hacked websites and help companies to basically do incident response and so forth. And Dave, our CTO, he was at that time actually studying cybersecurity in States, and he was an active bug bounty hunter. So he was looking for security vulnerabilities in government websites and things like that. So he was kind of like reporting the vulnerabilities in those different places, and then we kind of like combined, I would say, like the two worlds, right? So from my side, the website security angle of where I saw a big issue, and then we built this community of ethical hackers, who we work together with, finding new vulnerabilities and kind of like introducing this bug bounty mentality into this company as well. So today we are, by combining those two things, we are the largest vulnerability intelligence provider in the WordPress ecosystem. In fact, today I was just checking that 73% of all known security vulnerabilities found this year in the WordPress ecosystem were actually originally coordinated and published by Patchstack. So if you've seen, vulnerabilities being not detected on your website, very high likelihood, so 70% plus of likelihood is that this is actually a work from our side of finding those issues, making it public, helping the developers to fix it, and so forth. And our main core business, we work with many hosting companies, digital agencies as well, MSPs now. And what we do is when we identify security vulnerabilities, we build a software called Rapid Mitigate, which then automatically mitigates those security vulnerabilities. So we have the widest coverage of vulnerability mitigation on the market with, I would say, like 13,000 vulnerability specific security rules that we can dynamically deploy and enable on the websites, and just making sure that the vulnerabilities are getting eliminated before the hackers are taking advantage of that. So that's what we really focus on.
Nice, very interesting. So basically, 3 out of 4 vulnerabilities usually, most probably, are coming through
Yeah.
Patchstack, one way
Yeah.
or another. By the way, for
Yeah.
those who are not familiar with Patchstack, you also have the MVDP program, which is the Managed Vulnerability
And
Disclosure Program.
and this is one of the reasons, and this is one of the reasons why there's so much of those vulnerabilities coming through us as well, because let me quickly check. I think over 1,000 plugins already in the WordPress ecosystem use Patchstack. Yeah, 1,029 plugins, including some of the biggest ones like Elementor and so forth, are using Patchstack to essentially coordinate vulnerability disclosures. And so if you find a vulnerability in Elementor, Elementor asks whoever found the vulnerability to report it through the Patchstack system. We help them to basically validate it, make sure that the vulnerability is getting patched properly. We communicate with the security researcher who reported it. And then, all this information goes through Patchstack. So that allows us to also notify the customers about the security vulnerabilities before anyone else can do it on the market. And then also, if you know about the vulnerability first, then you can also protect the customers against those vulnerabilities first. So that's where a lot of these numbers are coming from.
Good. Yeah, in fact, we use you as well, and I've worked before, of course, with some of your team.
Yeah.
And for those who are not familiar, basically, it's very handy because most developers usually, I mean, they have a basic security understanding, but they might not have a solid understanding of what certain vulnerabilities are, how to exploit them, or they might have basic understanding and they might not secure the application well enough. So in this case, for example, if someone finds an issue in our plugins, they report it to Patchstack. Patchstack verify it. We don't have to verify it ourselves if it's a false positive or not. They even helped us reproduce the issue. We send the fix to Patchstack. Sometimes it's approved. Sometimes say, oh, listen, there's still this issue, etc. We get it fixed, and it's all handled by Patchstack. And on top of that, of course, that's one part of the business. But as you said, you also have a sort of firewall, virtual patching. So it can be used as what can be a traditional firewall, but yes, something that sits in front of your website. So if there are issues on your website, they are not exploited. Before we dive into Cyber Resilience Act, from your perspective at Patchstack, what are the most significant security challenges facing WordPress websites nowadays?
I don't know if you've seen our recent study where we basically, so something that has always come up is like, hey, we are already using Cloudflare, we're fine, right? And you can replace Cloudflare with whatever firewall, mod security or fail to ban and all these kind of things, right? So a month or two ago, we actually were like, okay, let's really put that into test, whether this is, how much there is to protect if websites are behind Cloudflare and things like that. And today, if you go to web hosting companies, you see majority of them are saying that you have a secure hosting or that they offer a secure web hosting experience, right? So we signed up to I think 20 different web hosting companies looking into different kind of hosts that use different kind of security stack. Some of them are using Cloudflare, some of them using Immunify and all these kind of different products. And what we did is that we basically built like a damn vulnerable WordPress website, right? Where we basically installed plugins with vulnerable versions where these vulnerabilities were already mass exploited. These were very critical vulnerabilities that have been going through the media and so forth. Everyone knew about them. They were not new ones or anything like that. And then we just signed up to regular web hosting plans that any of us could go and what mostly people are using, installed that WordPress website there, and then specifically attack those vulnerabilities ourselves, just to see how do the default security solutions that the hosting companies have for the customers actually stand against those kind of vulnerabilities. And what we realized is that 88% of those security or those attacks went straight through. And we were able to take over the websites, which means that the kind of the security promises and the security solutions that currently have been on the market are very generic. They are for example, Cloudflare, they're very good for covering the network level. There's solutions that are sitting in the server side to basically notify you about malware attacks, or for example have they patched the PHP engine and things like that. But when we look into how the websites are actually taken over, it's all happening on the application level. So and this is what I see as a problem in the industry right now, is that all the web hosting companies, they're trying to protect the WordPress websites, but they are applying security on the wrong layers. They're applying, which I'm not saying that security should not be applied there. It still should be, but there is a blind spot on the application layer. And by what I mean by that is when we look into, so we beginning of this year we released a white paper together with Sukuri, and something that we, and something that they reported back to us is that they basically saw 500,000 websites hacked last year alone. And then when we look into like how those websites are being hacked, and this is again data from a third-party provider, is that essentially, half of the websites are getting hacked due to kind of like compromised admin accounts through session hijacking, by poor passwords, lack of multi-factor authentication, all these kind of things, right? And then pretty much the second half of it is plugin vulnerabilities, and you sprinkle a little bit of people just installing null plugins and stuff like that as well on top of it, right?
Of course.
But if you think about it, it's still all application issue, right? WordPress core itself could have two-factor authentication. It doesn't have. I wish it would, but because of that, I think we need to, if all the people who are using WordPress would use two-factor authentication, a solution like, for example, Melapress is offering, you couldn't actually do big part of those attacks on this layer, right? So what I've always said, like actually covering WordPress security is quite easy. You need to make sure that you don't have vulnerabilities that can be exploited, so you have proper vulnerability management. You make sure that your privileged accounts are secure, which means you have multi-factor authentication enabled, and then just don't reuse your passwords, right? And that's pretty much like a big chunk of what you can already do. And I think that is one of the fastest way to basically secure. So I would say, something we really need to figure out in the ecosystem is really kind of like, okay, we've really like over the past 20 years of what WordPress has existed, we've really tried to solve the security on like where can we like hit as many flies, at the same time as possible, without really focusing on where the security threats are, or like how the websites are actually taken over. We try to apply like very generic solutions in front of it, but we see it just really not has solved anything. So now we need to take a different strategy and really start focusing on the application.
Good. Yeah, I agree 100% with you. Keeping a WordPress website secure is not that difficult. As you said, if you keep accounts secure, you don't share passwords, use user roles, and keep your software up to date, you're pretty much there, quite frankly. But of course, people are. By the way, this is not just common to WordPress. I used to be a systems engineer in the early 2000s, and there was a phase where we used, I don't know if you remember, Microsoft IIS, Internet Integration. It was like competitor to Apache. And yeah, of course, it was the early years, so they had a lot of issues with it. And most of the time when websites got hacked were basically because they were running outdated versions of IIS. It's been, patch management has been a problem in Windows since the early days of computers, not just in WordPress. But of course, in WordPress, you have the factor, of course, where you have a lot of people who do not have maybe the technical expertise to maintain a website. So of course, they're not familiar with that.
Yeah.
So talking about vulnerabilities, and this brings us mainly to today's discussion, Cyber Resilience Act. You've spoke about it at WordCamp Europe. For those who are new, who have never heard of it and are working with WordPress, what does this law is? Can we explain first in plain terms and explain what it is?
Sure. Yeah, I've been talking a lot about that
Exactly,
and ahead of time quite a lot. So Cyber Resilience Act is a new law that was actually passed last year already, end of last year to be accurate. I guess the easiest way to maybe think of it is, it's like, we all know how GDPR changed the entire web, right? So Cyber Resilience Act is kind of like GDPR in terms of like the seriousness, but it applies software security, right? So GDPR was focusing on personal data security. So Cyber Resilience Act is focusing on software security. So for example, let's say you're a WordPress plugin developer, and you want to make your plugin available in the European Union to the European market. It is then considered a digital product. And that means that you basically need to comply with the Cyber Resilience Act and apply a specific level of security to that software. For example, if you're releasing updates, and this is something that I'm taking from a very close examples right now in terms of what we've seen in the industry, is that for years, plugin updates have been bundled. Like if there's a security fix, for example, in a plugin, they are often bundled together with here is an update, and then you see like a long list of changes into the plugin, and in the end there's by the way, there's also a security fix, right?
Some people don't even mention it, in all fairness.
Yes, and some people don't even mention it. So this is all going to be very illegal. So for example, Cyber Resilience Act says that all the security updates need to be separate from functional updates. But also it is going to be mandatory for everyone you fix a vulnerability to actually notify all of the users immediately, be completely transparent about you fixing a vulnerability. And also you need to report that information to the European Vulnerability Database. And this is actually something that this is quite literally why we built the MVDP for the WordPress ecosystem. And those who know, Patchstack was actually somewhat funded by the European government to actually build that platform as well. So what you need to also have is an SBOM, for example. So SBOM is software bill of materials. So it's like a cake recipe of you're selling a cake, and then your cake has a recipe list of the ingredients, right? So the software now needs to have the same thing. So if you're making a software available to the market, you need to have a list of basically this is made of this open source component, this open source library, things like that. So all of this needs to be available through that as well. And overall, depending on so there's Cyber Resilience Act is having multiple classes. It's class 1 is the default measurement, and then there's a class 2, which is for more critical infrastructure software, for example. Patchstack as software is going under highest class because we are providing security. So we will need to have basically independent auditors going over our kind of compliance as well. For the lowest class, for example, I would let's say WordPress plugin that is doing forms or whatever, they would most likely be on the kind of a lowest class, right? Where they just do their self-assessment in this way. But something to, I think, take into account is that it is going to change the ecosystem quite a lot, because majority of the plugins, especially those who have any kind of commercial element to it, it's a plugin that makes money. You are basically seen by the European government as a manufacturer, so you need to essentially comply to all of those all of those requirements. And I would say the visibility from the outside, whether you are compliant or not, is going to be very clear. With GDPR, it's I can tell oh yeah, we're super, we are compliant. We do all this GDPR stuff internally. I mean, I can tell it to you, you cannot check it whether we do it or not, right? So it is very hard for you to, until nothing is broken, nobody can tell me whether I'm GDPR compliant or not, because it's you don't have the visibility into our internal processes. It is very different with Cyber Resilience Act, because you need to, for example, have VDP. So in October next year, so I think in June 2026, one of the first obligations that is going to kick in is that all the software or all digital products made available in the European Union. That means let's say you're a US company, and it's whatever, I'm just focusing on US market. If in the EU someone has even the capability or even the availability to use your software, you need to be compliant. If you're basically having, so if that software is made available in the European kind of market, then in 2026 or June, the first obligations that you need to already have is vulnerability management. So is there a very clear place where I can report security vulnerabilities about your plugin or whatever your software is, right? If you don't have it, then it is very easy to tell for me whether you're compliant or not. If I'm coming, or for example, you released a software update after June 2026, and I see that you basically did a security fix, and on this release there was other other updates as well, I can already see that you are basically breaking the law. And why it's important is because I don't know if you're aware of what happened with the Accessibility Act. There was another law. So who is going to make the most money out of that is going to be lawyers. And with Accessibility Act, it's the same thing. You can see from the outside whether the website is accessible or not. And then lawyers started to basically send out emails. Hey, we have a client who is now, they were using your website. The website was not accessible for them. That caused damage to that person. You either pay us 5K or we're going to sue you. And this is what is expected right now that is going to happen with Cyber Resilience Act. Anyone who is using your software can sue you starting from June 2026 if you don't have VDP, if you don't release updates separately, security updates separately from the rest of the updates, and law firms are going to abuse it 100%.
Of course.
So that is something to really keep in mind.
It's definitely, there's a lot to break down there. Let's start with because you said like any software that is available or being used in the EU, is it premium software or also the free? Like if I have a free plugin, 100% free, nothing premium, like should I still be compliant with the Cyber Resilience Act?
So the way how Cyber Resilience Act is basically differentiating is they consider organizations as manufacturers and then stewards. The funny thing is that if you read through the Cyber Resilience Act, one of the first thing it says like is excluding open source software. And then when you read through it, it's like, but what does open source software mean? And then you're like, oh, but if the software is open source, but it is maintained by, if it's, for example, the software is open source, it doesn't make any money, but the maintainer is commercial entity, then it's already a manufacturer. So for example, I have a free plugin that is owned by my company that I make available for free and things like that. But my company is a web agency, for example. I'm just doing like web designs and stuff like that. I just happen to also own these plugins. Regardless whether they make money or not, it's already a manufacturer because the organization on top of it is a manufacturer. Now, the similar thing happens with open source software in the stewardship. Like the question is like, is WordPress.org or like WordPress as a CMS? What is it? Is it like a manufacturer or steward? And right now it looks like it's, WordPress.org is a steward, or like WordPress Foundation is the steward for the WordPress core. And then WordPress Foundation would be responsible ultimately for the security of it. And stewards have the same thing. Stewards also have to they have like a lighter scheme of the compliance, but they still need to comply basically. If you're just like, it's my personal project, I'm just like,
yeah, it's on your name, not on the company name, even though.
Yeah, if it's on my name, I don't like, I'm just individual contributor to a purely open source. Like I'm not calling it open source because I would call like FOSS is like free and open source software. That's what they use it in the legals as well. Like it's if it's FOSS and I'm like individual contributor, then obviously I don't own it, right? It's like sits somewhere in the GitHub, I don't have like full control over that software, then, then it's considered like fully open source and then you don't need to comply. But when we talk about WordPress ecosystem, for example, specifically, how many of those cases there are? Like there's so many, like when we talk about the majority of the plugins that are popular, for example, they are all commercial products actually.
Of course.
And the thing with the Cyber Resilience Act is that it doesn't matter whether you're actually making money. If there is, like, even for example, if you're collecting data with that free product for any kind of commercial, like you run ads on it. Like if it's free software, but you're like collecting like metrics, like metadata back to basically use that for whatever business purposes, it is already considered commercial activity.
Interesting. You also mentioned WordPress.org, and the foundation, because you have the manufacturer and the steward. So what is the repos or the foundation's responsibility? Is it like, should they make sure that the plugins who are on the repository adhere to these rules, and if not, they should kick them out? Like, what's their role exactly in this whole scenario?
Well, what we see with, like, for example, NPM, like Node package manager, with different ones, they have already said that, all security related discussions need to happen directly with the vendors. WordPress has been trying to take a different route where they're saying like, oh, we have some level of control over the plugins in the repository and so forth, but I honestly don't think that it's a good idea to do that.
No.
And I think, like this is, that would make them like a shared kind of like maintainer for all this software, which comes with, shared responsibility as well, right? So I think ultimately WordPress.org should probably go in the same direction of other repositories where they're like, unless there is like a supply chain attack and a plugin in the WordPress repository has been changed to a malicious one and is being spread there, then this is the responsibility of the repository to keep itself clean, right? But if there is a security vulnerability in a plugin that is sitting in the repository, that is the responsibility of the vendor itself that is maintaining that software. So all this security reporting information should go actually directly to that vendor. And quite frankly, the repository shouldn't even have the visibility into this vulnerability information because they are a third party in that case, right? Otherwise, imagine like if there is like a software sitting in GitHub and you find a security vulnerability in it, then you would report it to GitHub. Or like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You should report it to the vendor itself.
Yeah, I think it would be easier even for WordPress to just stay out of it.
Yeah.
Like,
but there is definitely like, but from, having mentioned WordPress.org, like there is quite a lot of work that they need to be doing because, for example, for plugin developers to currently release, to be compliant, they would need to release security fixes separately from, functional releases. WordPress.org currently has like no way of flagging security, like updates as security updates at all. In a way, like, and also like if you go to WordPress.org, like what we've done with Patchstack and, with different vendors, like, such as yourself as well, is like we've kind of like brought in like this like report vulnerability here into the metadata of the plugin, right, into the README file. So if you go to WordPress.org, there is a place where you can kind of like, you need to go through the README file and then you find a place where to report vulnerabilities. This actually should be part of, like, if you go to WordPress.org into the plugin repository, WordPress.org itself should basically make it mandatory for every plugin to have like a link to their VDP. And it should be in the UI of the .org to like, hey, report vulnerability here. And it would basically be a link that sends to whatever the VDP is being used by that software vendor, right? But this should be a mandatory thing that is being asked from every plugin if they want to be listed into WordPress.org.
Which is not at the moment.
It isn't right now. And also there isn't like the ability to basically release security fixes separately from functional ones. You can do it manually, right? You can say like, this is a security fix. But I think making, pushing the vendors in this right direction, I think is something that .org should probably do because we don't have a lot of time left until these regulations are going to kick in. And if there's going to be people lagging behind, then this is going to be additional kind of like bad reputation for the WordPress ecosystem, I would say.
Yeah. One of the other requirements is that you need that security updates should be specific, like security updates, and nothing else should be released.
Yeah.
Now, a few years ago, when there was an issue in a vulnerability, and it was made public via some disclosure or something, it used to take weeks, maybe sometimes months, until it's mass exploited. Just 2-3 years ago, we were talking about days. Nowadays, we're talking about hours. Do you think this will help now? Like, because like as soon as you are, let's say, big plugins which have even like, you have 200,000 active installations or more, there are like some which have millions. As soon as they're going to announce it, all the websites which use that plugin, they're going to be a target. And we know that, of course, you need to update, keep the plugins up to date. But the reality is, especially on bigger websites, I'm not saying we should delay it by a month, but you need at least a few hours or a day to like to fix things, to test things. And so how will this impact this whole this whole thing? Because now it's literally making it public. Like everyone who's using plugin X is vulnerable at the moment.
And yeah, like now the law actually requires you as a plugin developer to also notify all users immediately when you're fixing a vulnerability. So it
And
is
with
not even
WordPress, we
possible.
don't. We don't have direct access. WordPress.org has because they can notify them via the dashboard. But as a plugin vendor, we
Yeah.
don't. We just release an update.
So you're actually bringing up a very interesting problem. Is that a lot of the vendors through WordPress.org, they don't have a direct way of contacting their users
No.
at all, which is a problem on its own. Like, how can you? But that means that you would need to be able to. There needs to be a way how you basically at least add this information onto your website, and then you have to tell the customers like, please follow the like if keep an eye of security update information through our blog or something like that. So the vendors itself at least need to like tell the users upfront that they need to then follow. Like if they are not signed up to a newsletter or whatever, they need to then follow they take their own responsibility of following the blog, basically, having it open all the time. It's like just to check whether there's a new vulnerability. But it is going to be the vendor's responsibility to immediately notify their users about the vulnerabilities. And a blog could be a way to do that. Now, this is again a problematic thing because if you're fixing a vulnerability, I can look into the track when you did it, and then I can go to your website, and if I don't see any, I don't see any notifications that you have fixed this vulnerability or you haven't sent out information, I could sue you because you are not following the Cyber Resilience Act regulation, right? So that is that's why I have like a big concern with the Cyber Resilience Act in that regard, is because this is so much like this is like fully outside confirmable whether you are compliant and basically following the instructions or not. So yeah, it's this is definitely going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, because by releasing, if you look at some plugins, like your sort of the big ones, we have like 5 million plus.
Yeah.
As soon as you release a security update, all those websites are in the spotlight right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Before.
like, in fact, there was just like I think like a month ago or something, Mandiant, which is like a threat intelligence company under Google, they released like basically like a study of like how fast vulnerabilities are getting exploited, and it's been like dropping like from like a month to like 2 weeks and so forth. The recent one for like shown for 2025 was like -1 day, which is like
Wow.
crazy because that means like we are like so behind the curve already that there is like there's not even a point of hiding this information anymore as well. Like this is something that we've discussed with how AI is, for example, changing the ecosystem as well, is that in the past, if a new vulnerability was found in a plugin, what you needed to have is at least some technical skills to take the diff of fixed version, patch version, look into it, trying to figure out where exactly the vulnerability was fixed, what the vulnerability was. And then you needed to write an exploit script, and then you could basically run the attack. So the ones who were able to basically weaponize the vulnerability really quickly and like start exploiting fast were like more skilled hackers, right? So the volume of the attacks were a bit lower because of that, because it was limited to certain skill level of performing those kind of like mass exploit campaigns. Now we are in a situation where, first of all, you can fully monitor the entire repo of all this change log, all the changes. You can run them through AI and say like, hey, if whenever there is like whenever you identify sanitization check added, for example, into the diff, send me a notification. Once that is done, please tell me where this sanitization check was done, what kind of vulnerability it could have been, and then, hey, I need for blue team purposes or like for defensive purposes, can you build me a script so I could test my systems against this vulnerability? And then what AI is doing is like, okay, sure, like I'm gonna basically build you an exploit script, and that the time to weaponization with this kind of capabilities completely almost like, removed. So we are in a situation where you can essentially exploit like whenever even if you don't actually disclose in your plugin changelog file that you have fixed a vulnerability, like literally, vulnerability, like this is a security update, this is a vulnerability fix, then even at Patchstack right now, we get notifications immediately when plugins are basically adding those sanitization checks and so forth. We already see, like we have a bunch of patterns that are automatically following, and we see whenever this is happening. So we see it anyways, and so do hackers. And now, their goal is to exploit it as fast as possible, so nobody has had time to update. So actually, if the vendor is not letting their customers know immediately, the only ones that are benefiting from it are the hackers, because then they can exploit more websites, because a lot of the users are still not aware that there was a security fix in the first place.
When you say customers, because it just came to mind now. So in WordPress, you have most plugins, they have the same model. You have the free plugin, which is available completely for free, and then you have the premium. Are we referring to the premium users, or are we also referring to the free? Because as we said, like there's a big difference. Because usually, even though if they're using the free, which is completely free, you're not getting anything from them. No email.
It doesn't matter. It applies to all. So if you're making a software available to the European citizens, and then you need to comply. And if your software is commercial by nature, meaning that it has a premium version, the software itself needs to comply, regardless who the users are, whether they're paying or not.
So as long, again, I know you're not a lawyer, but in terms of the free edition, one of the biggest challenges, as we discussed, like we don't have direct access to these people. So as long as we say, once the law is implied, if we put a banner in the plugin and say, hey, you need to make sure you keep up to date with us. We have an RSS feed here, or the blog, or make sure you check it. And we have a blog feed where we release the updates, the changelog. Then are we covered, kind of thing? Does it solve part of the issue with the free users? Because the premium is easy, because usually the premium, they pay you, you have the email, you have direct contact, so it's much easier to get. But the free users is always a big problem, because the visibility of the user
you need to cover. So the compliance happens on the software level. So the software itself, the way how the software is maintained, that process need to be compliant, regardless whether I got the license for free or I paid for it or it was completely free. If that software itself is owned by a commercial entity. So even if you would, for example, they would be a separate products, like, you have a premium plugin and then you have like a completely free one. You still maintain it, but like it's completely free. You don't provide even like paid support or like anything like that. Then it's still going to be, you as an organization are considered manufacturer of software, even if that software is made available completely for free for the users in the European, like made available for anyone to use in the European Union, then you need to be compliant.
Interesting.
And then the same rules apply to the software.
Interesting. And one of the other requirements was reporting vulnerabilities to ENISA, which is the EU Vulnerability Center. It says basically without undue delay. Does this apply to newly discovered vulnerabilities or to actively exploited ones? As in, like, if someone, you know how this process works. So someone reports a vulnerability, they go to the MVTP. There's no advisory public yet. You're working on the fix, etc. And then you release the update. Then there's the advisory. At which stage should you be in touch with ENISA, or what happens if you don't?
So I think it happens. I do feel that ENISA is trying to kind of like step into the CVE kind of world. ENISA is trying to. I know that when there was like some budget cuts for the CISA in the US, who is managing the whole CVE program and things like that, ENISA was like kind of like getting to a point where like, okay, we need to have like a replacement for the CVE program, right? Because it was like, okay, we cannot be sure, like this is like a global infrastructure thing. So how we've seen it so far from how it's been communicated to us is that essentially whenever a software vulnerability is being fixed, the moment when you're notifying your users, that information needs to immediately then go to Enisa as well. So it's like it should be basically the same process, right? So you notify your users and immediately notify Enisa as well.
I see. Another requirement from what I was researching this subject is like you should provide security updates for the expected product lifetime, or at least 5 years.
Yeah.
The question is, because if you look even at our plugins or most plugins, you release an update. If you look at the statistics on WordPress.org, usually it's around 50% which have your latest version of the plugin. The rest are still using earlier versions.
Yeah.
So in terms of in WordPress, there's no like something like PHP. PHP, you have like, okay, version 7.0, this is end of lifetime, this is end of security updates. And should we be doing the same for every WordPress version update, or as long as you release the latest version with the latest fixes, you are covering everyone? So I like right now we're on version 5, for example, of the double perspective lock.
Honestly, I think I personally think that end of life, like introducing end of life essentially to WordPress ecosystem would be very healthy thing to do, especially taking into account, like, I don't know if you remember last year in October, we organized this kind of like, right now it's the Cybersecurity Awareness Month.
Yeah.
So last year what we did was we basically created like a big cleanup event. So we were like, okay, let's look into the plugins that have like very low installation counts in the WordPress ecosystem that haven't been updated for a long time. Let's start looking for vulnerabilities in those plugins and see whether we can even like any way reach those vendors. I think we closed down like 1,000 plugins in a single month.
1,000 plus. It was,
yeah. And that is a problem. Like that's only as much as we have time to do it in 1 month, right? I think there is a huge amount of plugins in the WordPress ecosystem that have actually basically been abandoned, completely abandoned. But there is not even a way for the developers to say like, hey, I'm not working on this project anymore. Basically, this is like end of life, right? I think we need to introduce that in general. Like we need to be able to do that. And there needs to be some level of responsibility developers are going to take if they are not actually, like if they abandon software without letting the customers know that this is end of life. Because I think this is like a huge security risk for a lot of I don't remember what was the unified installation count of those abandoned plugins that we helped to close down. I think it was like in hundreds of thousands of websites that were still running those plugins. And like if you go into the WordPress admin interface, looking into all the plugins that you have installed, it just shows you that everything is up to date and very good.
Exactly.
But the reality is that the plugin is now completely closed down. The WordPress core doesn't even show you that it is essentially even removed from the repository due to security reasons, and that is a huge problem.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I agree with you with some sort of end of life. So if a plugin isn't updated within, I don't know, 1 year, whatever, get in touch with the developer, and the developer is not responsive, you should have some sort of system. But what about the actively developed plugins? A real life example, our plugin. So double pick develop, we are version 5.2.2. Less than 2 years ago, we released, it was version 3. So if there's a security issue right now, should we release a patch for 5.2.3 and release a patch for version 3 as well, like WordPress do, because of, or we just keep on building the latest version?
I think it really depends also on like whether you can. I think it's a question a little bit about backwards compatibility as well, right?
Exactly,
so
yeah.
If it's like is there a migration needed, like a separate migration needed to move from version 1 to version 2? If there's not, if it's like it's not essentially like a different version of, or like how to say, if it's like, for example, with Drupal, like you cannot just go from Drupal 1 to Drupal 2. Like you need to basically have like a complete rebuild, pretty much. Some people have said to move from Drupal 1 to Drupal 2 is a bigger task than migrating from Drupal 1 to WordPress, right? So it's like, it's such it's a big thing to lift. I think as long as you have basically like that level of backwards compatibility where the core of the software is basically still the same version. I don't think that it needs to be separate. You don't need to like have security fix for separate for every single version. But this could be something that European Union doesn't care about when it comes to WordPress, and they would just enforce everyone to do that. We don't know yet. I think somewhere in the middle of December, we should receive actually the specific guidelines from the European government in terms of how exactly those, what the specific expectations are. There is a possibility that if you whatever versions you release, like 3.1.1, for example, 3.1.2, if you're releasing, if there's a security vulnerability, then that affects like from 3 to whatever versions, then you need to have like 3.1.1/security, 3.1.2/security fix, right? That would be infrastructural pain to do in the WordPress ecosystem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially to smaller plugin vendors, because it's something. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, as vendor, I'm sure, like everyone as a vendor, you always want users to use the latest version because it's the most stable, the most secure, the most efficient. So there's no point. Sometimes even even like we receive support email like, "Hi, we're still running this version." Like, yeah, we released that version like more than 3 years ago. Why are you still using it? You want people.
The logic behind why this is needed is because then you can always apply a security fix without having to make any functional changes. So even if you're like on, let's say you're on 3.1.1, but the latest version is 3.1.7, and then if you would like release the security fix on 3.1.8, for example, then you would need to basically inherit all of the changes. Like to get the security fix, you need to inherit all of the changes within those, between 3.1.1 to 3.1.7, right? So that is like that requires a lot of testing, and then the problem is that people are not going to update because they're like, oh shit, this is going to break everything. So the logic of having separate security fixes for those versions is that people could just like click security fix, the plugin is getting automatically, or like even that could actually help WordPress to have quite good automatic security updates without actually breaking anything. So you could essentially have WordPress core have like option to apply. So updates are manual, like all the software updates are manual, but security updates are automatic. And then that could be possible to be done then if you're essentially doing it in such a way where for every version you're going to release a security fix separately. But that would require quite a heavy lift from all the plugin vendors, and people would need to get used to this kind of. I think that would also probably reduce the release cycles being made by the plugin vendors, because they're like, if we're churning out the version every single day, for every single small update, we're releasing like almost like, kind of like a continuous integration matter, right? So like, oh, new fix, we're releasing a new version. Like, some plugins release like an update every single week, basically. I think if we would introduce this kind of, if we would introduce this sort of kind of like a process where, all this, like every security fix needs to be on top of the existing version, I think vendors would not release that many updates.
Yeah, it is a bit of a problem. We don't have that release cycle, that release cadence.
Yeah.
But without what it seems like the market is heading in that direction. As you said, there are plugins to release. I know a plugin definitely 2 or 3 which have a release cadence of every 2 weeks. 2 weeks anyway. So without wanting to remain relevant in the market, you have to. So everyone is kind of like pushing each other, and it seems like we are heading in that direction where you need to have a certain release cadence to remain relevant. And then, of course, that leads to other problems. Your personal opinion, like, why do you think such law was needed? As just to set some context, like in software, not just WordPress in general, like we already have processes in place, although none of them were official, But
Mhm.
yeah, the idea of vulnerability disclosure program, responsible disclosure, is coming from the mid 90s or earlier. There was HackerOne and all these programs.
Yeah.
There were never official laws and programs, but there were vendors like HackerOne who took care of these things. Like, do you think like this law is needed maybe to standardize the process? What was the purpose, and how it will affect everything?
I think we kind of answered also for this question by the beginning of our discussion, where it's like all of this, like why 500,000 WordPress websites are getting hacked 20 years after we've had security solutions, all kinds of applied on the
Yeah,
hosting level. And we're still in the situation where the number of hacking incident is going up, and there's so much malware going on that is being used for all kinds of like criminal activity and things like that. And then when we look into where, like, what's the entry point of all those attacks, it's the application layer, right?
yeah, yes,
um the big problem is that, but like the web itself right now is such a wild west where you never know what is this, like what is the standards of a software developer who has released a product. Anyone can, especially now with like, and I'm actually even concerned about this whole vibe coding thing as well, because who is going to take responsibility of all the code that is generated by that? I think there's going to be people, like ultimately it's people who are using AI to generate code and they have like no idea what they're doing, and they are getting this responsibility put on on themselves. But I think ultimately it's great. I think it's bringing standards into software security. Everyone needs to have some security process, like like basic security processes in place when they are making software available in the public. And I think right now it's been like, we've seen products being released on the market. It's like, oh, this is the best security, best software, most secure. And then you look into the code and you're like, oh my god, what's going on here? But the problem is that the users of that software have no idea, like no capability of looking at the code and realizing whether they're being basically, given promises that are completely made up, for example, and there's like no security to be seen within the code base, right? So I think it's actually going to make the web a lot more secure. I think ultimately it's just like, when we think about like having an SBOM, if you go to a shop right now and you buy food, for example, like imagine nobody would tell you what it's made of, right?
of
You
course,
know,
yeah,
so I think it's just like it's like software ecosystem getting more mature. Big part of the products that we are consuming today are digital products. So we just need to make sure that this digital element of it is going to get secured. So otherwise, we are going to get scammed and hacked left and right, and nobody's
yeah.
going to take responsibility. And if nobody's going to take responsibility, there's no reason for us to basically improve. In the end, like the end users are just going to be the ones that are paying for, getting
The price,
basically,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
No, I agree 100%. In fact, I was going to say it as well. Like nowadays, it's true there are like some programs and stuff, but it's still like the wild wild west at the end of the day. So,
Yeah.
so there's still no clarity. So just to recap a bit, what plugin vendors and developers need to do, they need to have a VDP, which is vulnerability disclosure program, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to use a managed one, but of course,
No.
as as I can attest to, using a managed one is really helpful. It makes it much easier. You have less work, but also much easier, and you are ensure that the fix is the fix, not to
I mean, I think it depends also whether you have security people in your team, because something that,
and
like,
how big the
it's
team.
funny,
Yeah.
like even we use our own managed system, because the big problem that you have is that with AI, the amount of fake security reports that are being sent to people is insane. Like we call it beg bounty. It's like begging for a bounty, right? And it's, beg bounty is a big issue where and I think many people have received that. If you have a website, someone has been kind of like sending you an email. It's like, hey, I found a security vulnerability in your website.
Yeah, you get
Will you pay me like a bounty into my PayPal? So I'm gonna tell you what it is, right? So,
yeah,
and then usually what these are is like SPF records missing, or like some sort of DMARC configuration thing, or
exactly. Yeah.
or some security headers thing, like in most of the
Yeah.
cases. So what the managed VDP helps with is that we are filtering all of this crap out for you. Because if there's like a high load of those, let's call them like noise reports, then there is a high likelihood that if you're not a security expert yourself, you are ultimately going to start dismissing the real ones that actually matter. So this is the whole goal of the MVDP, is to simplify that process. Like us as a security company, like we have the biggest experience in the WordPress ecosystem, but soon in the entire open source ecosystem of triaging security vulnerabilities, right? So we are actually already the biggest CNA in the world in terms of vulnerabilities coordinated. So we have a lot of experience with that. So we've just built systems that would allow us to already validate vulnerabilities really fast and very accurately. So if you don't want to build that capability in-house, then using a managed solution is quite good. But if you don't want to use a managed and you have maybe a security team internally, you can just create a security.txt file or create a very specific, for your software, a very specific policy and process of how security vulnerabilities should be reported to you, how they are processed, and you need to have that documented. So that's actually quite a lot of work.
Good. So you need a VDP or MVDP. You need to release security updates dedicated just
Separately.
by themselves. You need an SBOM, which is basically.
Yes.
Do you know what SBOM? Do you know what's the acronym?
Software bill of materials.
Exactly. Yeah. So for just who are not familiar, so basically all the plugins you see out there, most probably all of them use some sort of third-party components, and it's all building
like
blocks
JavaScript
together.
libraries, even WordPress, for example. I think WordPress has, I don't know. Last time I checked, I think it has hundreds or thousands of
I can imagine
dependencies.
Yes.
So, for example, WordPress is using React, for example. So, and another thing that is being discussed right now a lot is as well is so we've right now talked a lot about plugins. But based on what is the discussions right now in the European Commission is that if I'm a digital agency and I'm selling you a website, then the website itself is a digital product that I'm selling to a customer, right? That means that the website itself might also need to become compliant with CRA, which will just opens up a huge can of worms, because then for your website itself to be a Cyber Resilience Act compliant, you need to make sure that every plugin that you use in your website project has an SBOM that are compliant with the Cyber Resilience Act, that WordPress core itself is compliant with the Cyber Resilience Act, and that the website itself is also compliant with Cyber Resilience Act, which means that you need to start, as an agency, you need to start looking into okay, can we even use certain plugins? Because if those plugins are not yet compliant, then we cannot build a website that is compliant. So that being said, I think for plugin developers, becoming compliant quickly is actually an opportunity, because there are going to be plugins that agencies cannot use because they cannot build compliant websites, just because some of the plugins won't be.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So if I'm an agency, maybe I don't do any custom development at all. I literally get WordPress, I get a off-the-shelf team, get off-the-shelf plugins, and give it to someone. So I'm still
what is a custom development nowadays, right? That's a question, right? Is software engineering in general a custom development because you are using third-party libraries? Majority of the code is basically putting different library JavaScript libraries together. You're using something on the back end. Things. It's always combination of combining multiple pieces of software is already software development. So, and that is what WordPress is, right? You take the WordPress core and then you're combining plugins, and this is part. Every website is very unique in that sense. Even if you are making custom CSS changes, this is already software, right? So this is already unique software that you built. So you need to make sure that it's compliant.
Good. Do you think with CRA, looking forward towards 3 years, do you think we'll see much less hacked websites? Do you think that this whole... In fact, I remember you mentioned it a couple of times, and you are right. Cleaning hacked websites is only a business in the WordPress ecosystem. you don't see it anywhere else. Do you think that will slow down? Do you think we'll actually get to a better place?
I hope so. I think there is a lot of business. I do believe what I've seen is that in the WordPress ecosystem, the problem itself of insecure website has been monetized instead of solving the problem, right? So I do think that, and I do hope that we're like, if the vendors are going, so if the WordPress core needs to become more secure and it needs to basically ensure a higher level of security standards, maybe less accounts are getting hacked, right? Maybe I don't know. WordPress needs to enforce like stronger account controls, session controls, things like that. Like that it's like the requirement. It will just push them to do that, right? And then all the plugins, like if they want to stay on the repo or if they want to stay relevant for the agencies to be able to even use them, they need to have like much more rigorous kind of like security processes in place and things like that. And the end users would get notified about vulnerabilities faster, and vulnerability management in general will become like complete standard in the ecosystem. I think that would be a direction where we will see a lot more secure WordPress ecosystem as a whole and a lot less hacked websites. I do truly hope so, but I think WordPress is a big ship to steer. So
Yes.
I don't think that it's like, I think there's going to be some level of panic in June. That happened with with GDPR as well, where everyone's like, oh, who cares? But what we need to take into account is that there is a website called GDPRfinetracker.com, I think, where you can actually see how companies are getting, I think it was GDPR.
Yeah, GDPR enforcement tracker, I think. GDPR enforcement
Yes,
tracker.
yeah, enforcement tracker. You see how like companies are being fined
Oof.
every
Yeah,
single day. Like it's,
1.5 million.
1.5 million and so forth. What you need to understand is that Cyber Resilience Act is having exactly the same fine structure like GDPR has. The big difference now is that GDPR enforcement happens when the data has leaked, right? So it already means that there had to be like a massive problem with privacy or like a security failure where like personal data was left somewhere. With Cyber Resilience Act, I can literally see whether like I could basically European government can fine you from not having an MVDP or sorry, a
Yeah.
VDP basically. They can fine you if you are not releasing a security fix separately from functional changes. They can also fine you if you release the security fix but you didn't immediately report it to the EU. And you cannot hide it. That is the problem, right? It's going to be so visible to everyone, and it's very easy for European Union to start like enforcing
Of
it
course.
very, very fast.
Good. So before we close, in terms of dates, what are we looking at? Dates. By when do you need to have VDP?
So, but the VDP
Yeah.
has to be in place by June 12th of 2026.
And SBOM?
I think, let me check. I think SBOM, I think, was a bit later. But what we recommend usually is like the first things is getting the VDP and SBOM set up. This is the basics of, for any plugin developer, right?
It's the easiest in all fairness as well. It's very easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And then after that, you need to start doing like risk assessment for your software, have like some level of automation in place for vulnerability scanning within your own software, code base. Depending on your product, you might also need to get like some level of regular pen testing done, like outside pen testing done for the software as well. I can actually share like we have like Cyber Resilience Act checklist made for WordPress.
Yeah, we can share it in our notes, definitely.
I can send it to you,
Yes, please.
and then you can put that into the notes.
Good. A lot of food for thought. Thanks a lot, Oliver. Anything else
Absolutely.
before we sign out? Did we miss
I
something?
mean, I just don't leave CRA to the last minute. Don't be the one that's gonna panic in June. I think be prepared, read into it. It's gonna affect a lot more of like basically the entire ecosystem. It doesn't matter whether you are in the States or I don't know, in Australia or outside of EU. If you don't want to like block your software to be accessed in EU, you need to become compliant basically. So just look into it, and it's making it more secure and following those standards, I think it's gonna make everyone more secure. So
yeah,
I think
and
it's a
your own
good thing to
software
do.
better. Yeah, and as you
Yeah.
said, it can also be as a selling point, because I'm pretty sure within
Absolutely.
time, with the agencies will start looking at these things.
Absolutely, William.
Thanks a lot, Oliver. Thanks for coming.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone for following, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Oliver. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you.